Today I will be setting the Wilbert Salute, a burial vault designed specifically for those who have served this great nation. With this channel, I represent vaultmen across the United States, working 24/7, 365 to set up committal services for all the funeral homes across the United States. And these funeral homes can take us almost out into the middle of nowhere sometimes, into some beautiful territory in the outskirts of Clay County, Indiana. At our vault company, we handle a lot of the behind-the-scenes work that goes into the funeral industry, including the manufacturing and installation of Wilbert and Tri-Guard burial vaults, the sales and distributions of caskets. We also have a crematory that services the funeral homes of the area, but also has a pet cremation side to service directly to family members who have lost one of their four-legged friends. We also manufacture and install burial urn vaults as well, and set up the gravesides for celebration of life services and for green burials. When setting a burial vault, such as this Wilbert Salute, the first thing we do when we arrive to the cemetery is verify that we have the correct grave, and then we either place a cross or mounds into the bottom of the grave to allow our cables to be removed easier once the service has been completed. That being said, I do verify that the person that I'm laying to rest is of one of the Christian faiths and would not take offense to a cross being placed in the grave. If that information is unavailable, I simply place a mound on each end. This slightly raises the burial vault off the base of the grave to allow the ends of the cables to slip past the edges of the burial vault. We use two different types of equipment to set the burial vault over the grave. The device I'm using today is a vault buggy. This particular model is called the Johnny Handler from True Rebel Equipment, and with its 3 hydraulic points and its winch on the top, it makes setting a burial vault over the grave much safer for the vaultman, but also it minimizes the risk of damaging the burial vault when placing it down. The other device we use is called a hilljoy, and it's a battery-powered cart that drives the burial vault from on top of the truck down onto the ground or down onto the platform. We then use a jack and blocks to remove the hilljoy out the side, and then we can swing the vault from there. Since this Johnny Handler has 3 hydraulic leveling points, we are able to place those down and raise the entire buggy up into the air and make sure it's level before pushing the vault out over the platform. In difficult positions, we can use the winch on the top of the boom that pulls the burial vault out over the grave using a cable system. This piece of equipment really comes in handy on steep hillsides. Without the hydraulic lifts, the vault has the tendency to swing and move up against the side of the buggy, which can damage the lid or just scratch the paint. For over 8 years, I used a hilljoy, and I didn't think big bulky equipment like this buggy was necessary until I started using one. Once I began using a vault buggy like this Johnny Handler, my opinion on that matter changed drastically. As a burial vault installer, our job is not supposed to be easy. It is manually labor intensive. But I also like to think about my own safety. I have a wife and 3 kids at home, and the last thing I want to do is get myself hurt on the job. The good thing about this vault buggy is that it can help disperse the weight away from the edges of the grave. Cave-ins might be the #1 way that a vaultman can get hurt on the job. If the ground gives way on one corner of the platform, the vault may lean and fall down towards us, especially when using a hilljoy. A hilljoy must be driven really close to the edge of the grave and driven up on top of the platform using ramps, which in turn can put a lot of weight on one end or one corner of the grave. Now, the reason that I swung this Wilbert Salute into the air and turned it around is because each Wilbert burial vault has a place, an indentation on the end of the vault where the trademark goes, and the trademark always goes at the foot end of the burial vault. The trademark shows the name of the burial vault that was chosen by the family. In this case, it will say the Wilbert Salute. In other cases, it will say Monticello, Continental, Citadel, Venetian, Stainless Steel Triune, or any of the other burial vaults that Wilbert Vault Company manufactures. In most funeral homes, we deliver a smaller version of our burial vaults to be displayed in the funeral home so the families can see what we offer and what the funeral home suggests. Seeing this trademark in the cemetery can verify that what they chose at the funeral home is what they received in the cemetery. The Wilbert salute is the equivalent of a Wilbert Monticello, but it has customization options such as the nameplate and the emblem that are different from the Monticello. Some vault companies use a different color on the interior of the burial vault as well. The liner can sometimes be gray, and the lid can sometimes be two-toned with two different types of gray color. As a part of Wilbert's commitment to continue serving the community, Wilbert is proud to be the exclusive burial vault and urn vault company to officially partner with the National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. The first step of the burial vault setup process has been completed, and now we need to move on to the swinging of the vault. Before we do that, we need to make sure that any of the paint that was chipped or scratched is repaired before we begin this process. On each service, we bring an ample amount of touch-up paint to make sure the vaults are ready for when the family arrive. Once all the paint has been touched up, it's time to move on to the swinging process, and I've had many people ask me why we call it swinging a burial vault. The main reason it's referred to as swinging is because the burial vault is suspended by cables over the grave. The base does not sit down into the bottom of the grave, and the lid is supported by the weight of the base being suspended. And I'll explain that more as we get into this process. Our company sets up the Wilbert way on every single service, which is another term for swinging the burial vault. The first thing we must do is place carpets over our boards on each side of the burial vault. These skinny green carpets are referred to as runners. As I create more videos and put out more information about the burial vault industry, I want to make sure that new hires can find my videos and use them for training purposes. By making these videos and using the correct terminology, we can help the new hires become better adapted to setting burial vaults on their own. Many people think this should be a job for more than one person, but at our company, it is one man per truck and one man per setup. On days when we have an early morning service and an afternoon service, it is possible to do 2 services in a day. The reason that it doesn't happen very often is because of the territory that we cover. We have dozens of different funeral homes that we service, and some of them are over 200 miles away from each other, so the drive time often prevents us from doing multiple services in a day. This particular cemetery was 1 hour and 42 minutes away from our shop. And without any other services in the area for the day, this was my one service, and by the time I got back to the shop, I had just about put in an 8-hour workday. Now, one way that I am different from other burial vault installers is that I have a headstone cleaning company on the side. I began cleaning headstones in situations somewhat like this. Oftentimes, the grave diggers may get a little bit of mud splattered on the headstones around the setup or for the person that is being laid to rest. As I looked at this headstone, it was incredibly built up with algae and lichens, and the name was barely visible. After doing some research, I was able to find out that this is an infant gravestone, the child of the man that is being laid to rest today. And since I have all the equipment already on my truck, I thought it would be a kind gesture to the family to clean this headstone so it could be legible when they arrived. While I let the D2 biological solution go to work on that headstone, we can start by adding our equipment to the vault. This first set of equipment is referred to as feet. Technically speaking, this is Wilbert Way equipment, but for the vaultmen, we refer to them as feet, and each end has 2 sets of reels to reel the cables. Each end of the cable has a hook, and we insert the hook into the reel on the inside. On one end, we'll reel the cables 8 times and then line up the hooks to make sure they're even. If the hooks are not even, when we go to raise the vault off of the aluminum boards, one side of the burial vault may lift up higher than the other, and the vault will be uneven. Once we've reeled the first side 8 times and lined up the hooks, we can move to the other end and reel the cables until it is snug on the underside of the vault. Once both sides are reeled and snug to the bottom, we make sure that the hooks are aligned on the other side as well. It's at this step of the process when a vaultman is able to swing the burial vault. Now, in my opinion, I'd rather do everything right the first time than have to fix mistakes in the future, and swinging the vault could be a result of not placing the vault properly with the vault buggy. A lot of the grave diggers dig a grave pretty close to the dimensions of a burial vault. So what we do when we place the vault over the grave is make sure that both ends and both sides of the vault align to where the vault will lower into the grave without rubbing against the grave walls. If we place the burial vault too far to one side or too far to one end, and the vault won't clear the 4x4s or won't clear the sides of the grave, we can use these cables to swing the vault and adjust where it sits above the grave. If the vault is too far to one end, we can move the feet back on the end that we need the vault to move towards. On the other end, we can push the reels right up against the vault, and when pressure is applied to the cables, the vault will swing in the direction that we need. If the vault sits over too far to one side, we can angle the cables down to the bottom of the vault, and when tension is applied, the cables will swing the vault to whatever side it needs to go to be properly aligned over the grave. To make sure that the vault lifts evenly on both ends, we use a one-man bar. This connects both sets of feet and connects the gearing on the interior to make sure that both ends lift simultaneously and lower simultaneously. We then use a crank to lift and lower the vault. If the vault shifts too far when we raise it, that means that our cables weren't aligned properly, and we should set the vault back down and make sure that it's not going to hit the sides or the end of our platform or the grave. Some cemeteries will leave the backfilled dirt right behind the grave. Other cemeteries will pull the entirety of the dirt pile away. And I do want to defend the grave diggers pretty early on in this video, because some people may think that they made a disastrous mess behind the grave that you see here today. In reality, they did exactly what they were supposed to do. This cemetery had a small hill behind the dirt pile, and the owner of the cemetery requested that the excess dirt be placed over that hill to help with the mowing so that the mowers didn't bottom out and continue to scalp the grass. Once that filled dirt they placed back there has settled some after some rain and time, it will be seeded, and that will make it easier on the mowers in the future. When the cemetery does leave the dirt pile, we do cover it with grass, unless we know beforehand that the family would like to participate in the backfilling process, which does occur quite commonly. Now that it's covered, we can add our equipment that separates the lid from the base. This equipment is referred to as the lid rails and the lid carriers. The lid rails allow the lid to be pushed back away from the family, but still in perfect view. The lid carriers work like a clamp and clamp on each end of the lid, and when the base is lowered, the wheels on the lid carriers will catch over the lid rails, separating the base from the lid. It's important to place the lid carriers high and tight on the lid. If they're not snugged down, when it's lowered and the base is separated from the lid, the carriers have a tendency to lean down in towards the center, which gives the appearance as though they are not connected properly and that the lid is not displayed safely. One of our main priorities is the safety of the family when they're out in the cemetery. But making everything safe and making everything look safe go hand in hand. If our vault is swung properly and safely but doesn't appear that way, then our job wasn't completed. And if our tent is up safely and stable and secure, even in high winds, it needs to look safe and secure as well. Once we've checked to make sure that both of our lid rails have a very slight incline, we can remove both aluminum boards from underneath the vault, and the vault is now suspended over the grave by the cables. And it's now time to separate the lid from the base. We begin by lowering from one end of the vault, watching the wheels and making sure they align perfectly over the lid rail. Once this end is aligned properly, we can head to the other end and make sure that both of those wheels are on top of the rail as well. If we try to separate the lid from the base and push the lid back without the wheels being aligned, the lid can come off of its track and fall behind the vault base, causing more work for the vault man, but more importantly, it could damage the lid. Once we know all four wheels are aligned properly, we can lower the base down to its display height, which is where the reels on the opposite end are just visible. This ensures that the pistols on our lowering device can swing freely without hitting the sides of the base. On my rails, they have brakes on the end, so the lid can be pushed all the way to the end of the rails. Some vaultmen don't have brakes on the end of their rails and only push the lid back far enough for the lowering device to fit. We can then remove the safety boards that kept the vault safe during transport and also prevented the vault lid from sealing on the way to the cemetery. Wilbert burial vaults have a butyl adhesive seal that lies in the groove of the lid. This vault uses a tongue and groove method along with the adhesive to seal the vault from the elements on the exterior of the vault. When the base is raised into the lid after the service, the seal is activated, it spreads around the lip of the base, and adheres the base to the lid in a watertight, airtight fashion. Before placing the lowering device, which lowers the casket into the vault, I want to clean up the liner on the base and make sure there's no excess paint splatter. During the manufacturing process, small bits of concrete dust and pieces of concrete can end up in the bottom of the vault. That's where a leaf blower comes in handy. Rather than wiping out each individual speck using a towel or a rag, we can use the blower to blow out all the pieces and make sure the interior of the burial vault is clean and debris free. Now that the base is prepared, we can add the frigid imperial lowering device, which in my opinion is the best lowering device to use. There are other models, but I simply prefer this one. As a vaultman, one of our responsibilities is to assist the pallbearers with placing the casket over the grave. With this device, almost every risk and hazard is eliminated from anything going wrong when the pallbearers bring the casket. They can simply walk up to the end of the device and place the casket on the first black roller that you see I'm working on now. Once the casket rests on the first black roller, I can assist the family with pulling the casket across the lowering device. Once it clears the first strap, it will guide itself across the first set of pistols. In between the two sets of pistols are guide bars, and these bars make sure that the casket stays upright and seamlessly glides over the second blue strap. Once it clears the strap, it will come to rest at the end of the device up against the casket stop. This is here to make sure that the casket doesn't continue to roll off the other side of the lowering device. While the service takes place, I will lower the casket down onto the safety bars. These safety bars are here just to make sure that if the lock malfunctions, or if the lowering device isn't perfectly level, that the casket doesn't roll towards either end or slide towards either side. In my experience, the other styles of lowering devices that have the detachable rollers leave more room for error. If the individual being laid to rest is a large person, or if the casket is solid barn wood, oftentimes it can be too heavy for the vaultman to pull across both sets of straps and to clear the rollers. I've personally seen where the casket hits the sides of the rollers without clearing them and moves the rollers out of the way, and the casket may fall down into the burial vault if it doesn't clear the second blue strap. Our job lies at the end of a long process for a family who's already gone through the visitation, the funeral service, and the procession to the cemetery. The last thing we would want is to have any type of disaster like that happen while the family's present at the cemetery, or in general, no disasters. A funeral can be hard enough. The last thing we want to do is add any type of stress or grief for the family. There are times when a graveside service is scheduled and the funeral home arrives to the cemetery early. The family may not have pallbearers, and this device makes it simple enough that myself and the funeral director can place the casket on the first roller, and the two of us can place a casket over the device. Now, this is just a reminder to pay attention to your surroundings if you're a vaultman. If there's plywood out and it's been raining, you can slip and fall. Over my close to 10-year career, I've had many spills and falls, and now I do everything I can to prevent that. You only fall and hurt yourself once before you start taking every precaution possible. The last addition to swinging a burial vault is the use of T-carpets, and these carpets go on each end of the burial vault and cover up our reels. They can either be left folded up as you see here today, or they can be unfolded into their T-shape, and they will extend out, covering more of the grass. It's not possible to stake down the T-carpets, so I prefer to leave them folded up as much as possible. Eliminating trip hazards is something else we can do as a vaultman to try to make things safer for the family. Years ago, there was almost a disaster, and an elderly woman was walking up to the graveside, and one of the carpets was caught underneath her foot, and when she took another step, it rolled up against her other foot, and she started to fall. Luckily, there was a family member standing a few feet in front of her who was able to catch her and keep her safe, but on the other side of him was a 5-foot headstone. I knew from that moment putting these carpets out and not staking them down was just a liability, and with these stakes, it keeps family members from tripping because it holds them down more flush to the ground. If someone were to trip on the edge of these carpets, it also won't roll up underneath their feet, causing more of an issue. So I took rebar at the shop, cut around 8-inch pieces, and bent over around 2 inches at the top, and now I can use those to stake each of the 4 corners of every carpet. At our vault company, it's a general rule that carpets be placed anywhere the tent covers. I will also use these large green carpets for walk-in carpets whenever it's really muddy out to try to prevent the family from having to walk through the mud as much as possible. It's now time to begin the process of setting our committal service tent. At our company, we use a 15-foot by 20-foot 6-pole tent. And whenever the weather is nice, like this early morning graveside today, we leave the vault uncovered by the tent. This allows more people to fit underneath the tent, and also the emblem, nameplate, and our equipment to shine out in the sunlight rather than be covered up in the shade. Before setting the tent, I always place out my big green carpets. This allows me to base my tent poles off the carpets themselves, giving me a template to make sure my tent poles are straight. If the poles end up slightly angled, the whole tent will be off and I'll have to reset half of the poles. Before placing the tent, I'll go ahead and treat this headstone with D2 biological solution one more time and work some of that solution into the headstone and let it sit for a while longer. D2, being a biological solution, kills off the living growth, bacteria, algae, and lichens and helps pull the stains out of the headstone. By working this solution into the stone and letting it sit, the solution has more time to work and pulls out more and more of the stains. So I continually keep it wet, give it a light scrub, and come back a little while later and do the same. Some people will even just spray D2 biological solution on a headstone and come back in a few months, and as it rains and reactivates, it continually clears up the headstone and prevents more growth from returning. I set my first tent pole far enough back to where the pallbearers will not be hindered by where the tent begins, and I line my tent poles up with those carpets to make sure it's straight. Now, the burial vault setting process can be somewhat complicated for the new hires to get the hang of, but in my opinion, the tent is probably the hardest part and takes the longest for a new hire to adjust to. It's not much more complicated than setting a tent for camping or next to a football game, but since each pole connects to each other, if the stakes aren't placed correctly and the pressure isn't right in between the poles, the whole tent will lean, and sometimes it just seems impossible to get the pole straight and looking safe. Over the years, we have had multiple vaultmen lose a tent to the wind. Now, most of the time that this occurs, it's because there's a storm front moving in and somebody wasn't watching the weather. I've been lucky that over the past 10 years, the only time I've ever lost a tent was during a thunderstorm hours before the family arrived, and it wasn't because the tent wasn't roped down. I had multiple ropes on the corners and ropes in the middle, but unfortunately, the extension off the back of the tent snapped, the weld broke, and the extension flipped up and cut right through the top of my main tent. Whenever inclement weather is coming in and we know that we're facing 50 to 60 mile an hour wind gusts, we can do everything we can to secure the tents down, and oftentimes we're very successful at it. At that point though, it's not safe for the family, because we may have done our job right and set a safe committal service tent, but we are no match for Mother Nature. At a certain point, the equipment will begin failing, and there is nothing we can do to prevent Mother Nature from ripping apart one of these tents, and it's safer to take the tent down, wait for the storm to pass, cover the vault to keep it safe from the rain, and let the family know and the funeral home know that they may want to wait a little while until this weather passes to bring out the casket and continue the committal service process. When the weather gets cold, we do have canvas walls that surround the entirety of the tent, and if we do a good enough job with the walls, we could run a heater on the interior of the tent and warm up the inside by 15 or 20 degrees, which really helps the family be more comfortable during the graveside service. We also use those canvas walls to block the wind on really bad days. One of our main goals is just try to make the family as comfortable as possible. Some people have mentioned that it seems like a lot of work to be done for 15 or 20 minutes at the graveside. That being said, on the days when it's super windy, super cold, I know the families really appreciate having a safe place to have the committal service and to watch their loved one be lowered into their final resting place. On my tent, it has 4 corners and 2 middle poles, and it's important to make sure that the middle poles don't line up too close to the carpets or too far away. Those poles will end up leaning in or leaning out when the tent top is placed over the corners. Setting a tent like this is mostly trial and error. I could set every pole perfectly straight, and once the top is placed, every pole might be leaning. Once the tent is up, our main concern is just to make sure that it's not leaning in any direction, and that there's tension put on each pole to make sure that if a breeze comes up underneath the tent, it's not able to be lifted up off of the stakes, which is where the ropes come in handy as well. In some cases, funeral homes will reach out to us to let us know that there will be a very large crowd in attendance, and if we have the manpower and the availability, we may set 3 or 4 or even 5 of these tents at times. We are oftentimes asked to bring many more chairs out as well. It's our goal to just accommodate the family in whatever they request, as long as it's possible to do so. Once we have the main tent attached and the straps attached to the poles, we can add our 6 extension poles that prop up our main tent. These poles are all pinned into place to make sure that they don't move, and once all the poles are attached, we can go around and make sure all the hooks are connected and that all the straps are done as well. And luckily today, everything went up perfectly straight, so I don't have to adjust any of my poles, and I don't need to add ropes to straighten the tent out as well. Now that the infant stone has been sitting with D2 biological solution for around 2 hours, we can spray it one more time, get our jug of water out, and make sure that we clean out all the algae and lichens that have grown up in between the lettering, scrub the sides down a little bit more where algae and lichens have built up there as well, and thoroughly rinse this stone to make sure that the D2 did its job. Headstone cleaning is something that I take a lot of pride in, and I just made a video if you're interested in learning how to clean headstones, because the last thing you would want to do is harm one of these pieces of history. You have to make sure that you are using the correct products and the correct tools to clean the stone to make sure damage isn't done. For this cleaning, I simply use D2 biological solution, a soft scrub brush, a toothbrush, and a soft angled brush to remove all the algae and lichen out of the border on the top of the stone. Once the headstone was fully clean, it was treated with D2 one last time. This product can also be used as a deterrent to keep future growth from returning. For months after the product is used, it leaves an inhospitable place for algae and lichens to grow. It may be one of the more pricey products, but it does its job and it's safe to use. That's why I promote D2 over any other cleaning product, and it's actually the only product that I use other than regular Dawn dish soap. One thing I've heard a lot of people say, and this is something I will repeat until the cows come home, they use a pressure washer and it cleans it right up. Now I understand why you would think that that's a great idea. Headstones are extremely tough, very hard, and you would think that using a pressure washer would clean off all the debris and leave it looking good as new. Now if you're lucky, that may happen, but I would never take that risk. These headstones are engraved and etched on the surface, and that area that you see me washing off right now is not polished. So if you were to use a high pressure washer, like a pressure washer, you have a high likelihood of chipping out the lettering and chipping out the details, like in this little lamb that you see on the face of this headstone. I'm familiar with a cemetery, and I will not say where, that hired a local cleaning company who did pressure washing for houses and drives, fences, and things of that sort. That company came in with a heavy acidic cleaner and sprayed down all the headstones, and then they went stone to stone and pressure washed all the algae and lichen off. Now from a distance, that cemetery looks perfectly clean. All the white marble and granite headstones are shiny and white, but as you get closer, you see the damage that occurred. On all those older headstones, it was almost like they were sandblasted. The detail on the lettering and the detail on the birth and death dates is gone on some of the stones, and on other stones, it's extremely deteriorated. On the newer headstones that have more fine etching and painting on the interior of the lettering and the portraits that are painted on the front of those stones, a lot of that paint has just been blown away by the pressure washer. So it is very likely that headstones could be damaged. So please, before doing any type of headstone cleaning for profit, for charity, or for your family's headstones, please do your research and make sure you follow the #1 rule of headstone cleaning, which is do no harm. But now that the headstone is clean, we can allow it to dry and it will look good as new for when the family arrives. But it's now time to finish up our committal service setup. We start by using a leaf blower to remove all the grass and debris off of our carpets, and then we can set 2 rows of 6 chairs. 12 chairs is our average for every setup, unless otherwise asked by the funeral home to bring more, or sometimes less are needed. For most of our setups, we use chair covers that say Wilbert on the back, and some funeral homes request the military style chair covers that are a dark blue with American flags embroidered into the chair covers. Those are fairly rarely used though. Some people are against the fact that the American flags are on the chair covers where people sit, but in reality they aren't an actual American flag. They're more of a patriotic graphic. There's only a few stars and a few stripes, so they're not technically an American flag. Those were not requested for today's service, so we will be using the Wilbert blue chair covers. Each funeral home that we service also has a banner that we place on the sides of the tent. Today, this funeral home had multiple services aligning at around the same time, so I went ahead and set the tent backwards to hide the Velcro. Most funeral homes don't have multiple services going at the exact same time, but some funeral homes have multiple chapels that have multiple services. So in reality, we should probably order a few more banners for some of the more active funeral homes that have multiple services at any given time. When servicing tri-guard burial vaults, we have 2 different types of chair covers for those services. One that says the funeral home's name that uses tri-guard vaults, and another chair cover that simply says tri-guard across the back. I would probably say that around 90% or more of our burial vaults are Wilbert burial vaults. We've just recently started servicing tri-guard over the past year or so. Also at our vault company, we have many different flags to be flown at the services, ranging from sports teams to the American flag, of course, but also the military branches as well. But before finishing up this service, I want to make sure I'm cleaned up before handling the American flag and before placing out the tissues and the final touches to our burial vault. At our vault company, it's important that we represent the funeral home that we are servicing for the day. And since this is a heavy manual labor job, a lot of times we wear shorts and cut off t-shirts, and of course we're extremely dirty from shop work and working out in the cemetery on muddy days, so we do have a dress code while the family is present. It's just a small token of respect that we can show towards the family, that we do take a lot of pride in our work and we have respect for the family and the job that we do. To place the flags on the tents, we use 20-foot extension poles. These poles hold up to 3 flags at a time, and sometimes we'll even place 2 of these poles on each tent for when the funeral home requests multiple flags. For my grandfather's service, I had 2 flagpoles, each topped with the American flag, and underneath one American flag was a Chicago Cubs flag, and underneath the other was a Fighting Illini flag. One of the flags that we use most often, aside from the American flag and the flags of the armed services, is the Harley-Davidson flag. We do our best to make each individual service just that, a service for an individual. Setting the burial vault in the tent might be the same on every service, but we also want to add those little touches that let the family know that this is a service for them and their family, not just for another customer. It's at this time in the setup process where the military begins to arrive. When a member of the armed services pass, 2 active duty members will be present for the service to present the flag to the next of kin. In addition to 2 active service members, oftentimes they will send 6 active duty service members to be the pallbearers of the service and to offer the final rites. Local areas also have honor guards that will oftentimes handle the final rites, the folding of the flag, the 21 guns, and the presentation of the flag as well. When the active duty members arrive, we make sure we work together to make sure there's room to fold the flag in front of the chairs, so we'll move the chairs if we need to, We'll also speak about where the hearse is going to be stopped so that they can be in position. Although we're not associated in really any way, we all work together really well because we all have the same goal in mind: to do what we can to show respect to the person who has passed and to their family. It's now time for the final touch-ups on this committal service setup. A packet of tissues is placed on each chair. I'll also make sure that the carpets are swept at this time and make sure my equipment is shining and clean. We can then place the Wilbert Salute emblem, nameplate, and trademark onto the burial vault. And this is what sets the Salute apart from an average Wilbert Monticello. The emblem on this vault is a three-dimensional soldier showing the salute. The nameplate on the burial vault matches the color of the Salute emblem, and the trademark is that same silver placed on the foot end of the burial vault. In addition to the nameplate, emblem, and trademark, an American flag decal is also included with the Wilbert Salute. While most companies place this decal at the head end of the burial vault on the base, since we use the T-carpets, I choose to center this decal on the base in front of the family where it is visible. Aside from the salute, Wilbert also offers a stainless steel triune that is customized for veterans as well, called the Veteran SST. This vault is painted black with a silver highlight, and the lid is angled down towards the family in a display method called the ovation. It allows the lid of the burial vault to be more visible angled down towards the family, rather than pushed back over the dirt pile behind the grave. The cover of that vault is also customized with an American flag print and usually a portrait of the person who has passed. The stainless steel triune is one of Wilbert burial vault's higher end options, and it is incredibly beautiful. The inside is coated with stainless steel, as well as the inside of the lid. Embedded into the lid is a separately sealed time capsule that houses the obituary of the person who has passed. I cannot say thank you enough to those who have served in the branches of our armed forces. It's an absolute honor to do services for those who have served this great nation and to service their family as well in this troubling time. Funerals are incredibly hard to cope with, but they are also a celebration of the life lived. And as a Wilbert burial vault installer, I feel as though it is my responsibility to respectfully offer these services for the families with a sense of pride in my work. And when I can, I try to give back even more with doing headstone cleanings for the families. I've worked over 3,000 services over my 10 years, and the sound of the taps is something that will forever bring a tear to my eye. It's a moving experience to witness, and more than an honor to have set up the service beforehand.
Hey! Port arm. Prepare to fire. Ready, aim, fire. Ready, fire. Ready, fire. Cease fire. Present.
At the conclusion of a funeral services, there are different options for the family to choose as to what happens next. While most people assume that the family would stay to watch the casket be lowered into the burial vault be sealed and lowered, and the grave be filled, that's not the case for around 80% of families or so. At the conclusion of the committal service, families oftentimes move on to the luncheon or the repast that occurs directly after the committal service, leaving the task of sealing and lowering the vault to myself, the funeral director, and the grounds crew at the cemetery. That is not a requirement by any means. Many family members do witness the process of the casket being lowered and the vault being sealed. Many families also assist with the backfilling process, whether that be placing a ceremonial handful of dirt into the grave or completely backfilling the grave by hand. In some cultures, that is still the norm, and that does happen on every service. For other families, it is entirely upon their desires. On one of my services, a family is never required to leave the cemetery before this process takes place. I have been told by many people, once creating this channel, that they were not allowed to stay and witness the lowering process. In some cemeteries, they don't display the vault in this manner. They sometimes will have the base in the grave, and the lid will be placed onto the vault using a backhoe or heavy piece of equipment. Now, while that is not the method that I would prefer, and to me it doesn't seem nearly as respectable than lowering the casket and sealing the vault by hand, I still believe that a family should be able to stay to witness this process. The burial of our loved one is incredibly important in the closure of losing someone close to you. Seeing the vault be lowered and the grave be filled brings a sense of finality to what the funeral actually is. But I am here to serve the family, and whatever they choose is the route that I will assist with. For this family, they chose to move on and celebrate and share memories at another location upon the ending of this service. So it is up to myself, the funeral director, and the 3 grounds crew members to backfill the grave, remove all my equipment, lower and seal this vault. For the vault men out there, this process can be very intimidating to do while family is around, which is why it's so important in situations like this to train yourself to perform this service as if the family were viewing. The way that I seal and lower a casket is identical whether the family is present or not. It's our responsibility to be respectful and very sensitive of what is happening at this moment. We need to make sure that we are taking our time, not making any mistakes, not dropping anything, and making sure the casket goes down easily and sets down safely, and that the lid is perfectly aligned above the base when we raise the base into the lid to seal the burial vault. When the casket is lowered, it's important to release plenty of slack on the blue straps. These blue straps can then be wiggled out from each end of the casket. Once we've tightened down the lowering device, we can remove it and slide the lid of the burial vault over the base. It's now time to raise the base into the lid, activating the seal and sealing this casket into the burial vault. One thing I will mention is that it is common for family to place flowers on top of the casket before sealing the burial vault. If that is the case, I prefer to inform the family that the lowering device needs to be removed before placing flowers. By doing this, we don't risk knocking any of the flowers off of the casket when removing the straps. Once the vault is sealed, we can remove our lid carriers and our lid rails from each end of the vault before beginning the process of lowering the burial vault into the bottom of the grave. One other thing I encourage vault men to do when I'm training is to keep a firm grip on the crank at all times. It does take a fair amount of effort to be able to raise this burial vault, but when it comes to lowering the vault, the gearing on the feet is designed in such a way that if the crank is let go of at any point, the burial vault will take off and descend to the bottom of the grave at a much faster pace. If that happens, there is no chance of stopping the crank. It will break your hand if you attempt to stop the crank if you let it go. So in all cases, at all times, keep a firm grip on the crank to make sure you don't hurt yourself or to make sure you don't lose control of the vault when lowering it into the grave. Legally speaking, a funeral director must be present while the vault is being sealed. Once the vault is sealed and lowered, his work here in the cemetery is done, and I will go ahead and begin the process of removing my cables and moving all of my equipment so that the grave diggers can begin their work. We want to have healthy relationships with the grave diggers. We don't exactly work with them or for them, but we want to make sure that if any complications arise, that we are there to help them and they are there to help us. So at this time of year, when the weather is beautiful, we make sure we offset the grave, which allows them to get to work sooner, while we remove the tent and the carpets. If it were raining or windy, obviously this would not be possible, and most grave diggers are totally fine with that. The first step of the teardown process is to remove our cables and our one-man bar. We can then remove the sets of feet, our green runners, and our boards from underneath our equipment. Once all of that has been removed, the gravediggers can begin their job, and I can slowly begin to place everything back into my truck to make sure it's proper and ready for the next day's service. We never know what type of situation we're going to run into, and anything that slows us down is not something that we want. You never know if a grave is going to cave in, or we might even blow a tire on the truck on the way to the cemetery. We want to make sure that we have ample amount of time to set up a high quality and respectful presentation for a graveside service. Oftentimes, gravediggers will lend a helping hand when it comes to picking up and cleaning up our equipment. This particular crew digs at dozens of cemeteries, and they're always a pleasure to work with. Gravediggers are another aspect of the funeral industry that aren't seen too often, and a lot of people don't realize the amount of work that they have to do at times as well, to not only make sure the grave is dug in time for the service, but also to not tear up the cemetery. Luckily, it's been pretty dry lately, and we don't have to worry about leaving deep ruts when pulling our equipment in. Where you see my truck sitting today is actually the only access drive into this cemetery. And if it were really muddy and my truck would leave tracks, I'd be doing all the work from the road today. And one thing's for sure, I'll never miss a chance to pedal run. Now that my equipment's out of the way, the gravediggers can get to work, and I can change my clothes and continue the teardown process. Some gravediggers use equipment such as this to push the backfilled dirt over the grave. Other cemeteries use a tractor and haul off all the dirt and bring buckets of dirt back until the grave is filled. And other cemeteries use dump trucks that they fill up with the remainder of the dirt they need to fill the grave. Some cemeteries begin the backfilling process using pea gravel around the burial vault to assist with the leveling process. They then use a tamping machine to tamp the dirt and replace the sod back over the top. One of the main purposes for a burial vault is to maintain the grave in the future. As a casket deteriorates, the ground will settle, and every few years will need to be topped off and reseeded. With a burial vault, once the initial settling has happened, the ground doesn't settle again because the burial vault maintains the grave. This is one of the reasons why most cemeteries in my area require a burial container of some form, whether that be a concrete burial vault like I've installed today, or a concrete grave liner, which is not sealed, and its sole purpose is to prevent the ground from collapsing throughout time. And as I mentioned earlier, the grounds crew today are helping level out a section of the cemetery that has a bit of a ravine and is preventing the mowers from doing a good job in that area. So while it may not look too pretty behind the grave right now, they're doing that so that that section of the cemetery can look better in the future. The last thing the gravediggers will do is make sure that the grave is level and topped off, then they will place the flowers from the funeral over the grave. When the final rites are given, an American flag is also brought to the cemetery to mark the grave of someone who has served. And the only thing left for me to do is continue my teardown process, making sure that when I roll up the tent top, that the banner is visible for the next day, and then continue tearing down my tent, disconnecting each pole, and placing the poles back into the truck in their allotted position. Being organized as a vault man is key, especially when starting out. The average setup, especially on a day like today, where I'm pretty close to the spot of the committal service, can take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes to set up. But when you're a new vault man, still trying to get the basics down, a setup like this may take closer to 2 hours to 2.5 hours. And the last thing we want is to be crunched for time, leaving not enough time to take care of the little details, like wiping down our equipment and making sure everything's presentable. So being organized is key, and making sure we're not wasting time so that we can keep in mind those key details that show that we respect this family and make sure we want to do the best setup possible. Now that I have all my equipment, I can make sure everything is safely strapped down in my truck, get my buggy loaded up, and head back to the shop to see what needs done for the next day's services. As I'm finishing up a teardown, I think back and make sure there was nothing I could have done better for this family. As I look back on the headstone that I've cleaned and the veteran that I've laid to rest, I feel as though I did my part to show respect for this family and show honor to someone who's defended this great nation of ours. Working in the funeral industry can be emotional at times, which is why I try to do everything I can for the families that I service. This can be a heart-heavy job at times, but if I know that I did my best, I know that I can lay my head on a pillow at night knowing that I gave my all for a family who's going through an incredibly difficult time. And perspective can do a lot for a person. Working in this industry reminds me that at any time we could lose a loved one or that we may pass. There are families every day going through the loss of a loved one. Knowing that helps me keep an eye on the most important things in life: God, family, friends, and country. And no matter the stresses that I have going on, it's not a whole lot compared to the grief of the family who is mourning the life of someone they loved. This video has been the average day for a vault man in Central Illinois and Central Indiana. I appreciate you watching, and for more information on headstone cleaning, please visit some of my other videos where I give more information about the products and tools to use. And if you have any questions or opinions in general, please leave them in the comment section, and I do my best to answer as many as I possibly can. Thank you all for watching. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.